The air in the shelter kitchen was always a thick stew of smells: industrial-grade bleach, the sweet decay of donated vegetables, and the hearty, anonymous scent of whatever soup was simmering in the giant steel pot. For 3 months, this mix had been the smell of my life, the atmosphere I breathed for 20 hours a week. It was a penance and a paycheck, a way to keep my head just above the dark water that had swallowed my old life whole. My routine was a shield. Arrive at 2, chop vegetables until 4, serve dinner until 6, and then mop the floors until the linoleum gleamed under the fluorescent lights with a slick, lonely shine. It was a life ordered for safety, a rhythm designed to keep me from thinking too much. Most days, the rhythm worked. But some days, a detail would snag on the edge of my consciousness and pull. That detail was usually Arthur. He was a volunteer, not staff like me. He came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the same days I worked the dinner shift. He was older, maybe by 20 years, with silver at his temples that looked deliberate, like frost on a handsome stone building. He never spoke much, but his presence was a quiet foundation in the daily chaos. While others bustled and shouted, Arthur moved with a calm economy, his hands, large and capable, always finding the thing that was broken: a wobbly table leg, a dripping faucet, a frayed wire on the ancient toaster, and fixing it without a word. I watched him from a distance, from behind the steam of the dishwasher or the mountain of potatoes I was peeling. I told myself it was just curiosity. He was an anomaly here. His clothes were simple: dark sweaters, well-worn jeans, but they fit him with a precision that spoke of money. The coat he hung on the hook by the door was a deep charcoal wool that held its shape, unlike my own thin jacket, which slumped in a weary puddle beneath it. And then there was his watch. It was a simple leather band with a plain silver face, but I'd seen one like it once in a magazine window, and the memory of the price tag made my stomach clench. He didn't belong here, yet he seemed more at home than anyone. I kept a memento of him, though I wouldn't have admitted it to anyone, not even myself. A few weeks ago, he'd been sketching on a small notepad while waiting for a delivery truck. When he left, a single sheet had fallen to the floor. It was a charcoal drawing of a sparrow, perched on the shelter's bent rain gutter. The detail was breathtaking. Each tiny feather, the glint of intelligence in its eye. I had picked it up, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the back of my wallet. It was a secret I carried, a small, beautiful thing in a life that had become relentlessly practical. It was a reminder that the man with the quiet hands held a world of artistry inside him. That Thursday started badly. My landlord had slipped a notice under my door about the rent being late again, the paper a crisp, official yellow that felt like a slap. I hadn't slept well, the numbers churning in my head all night, and I'd arrived at the shelter feeling hollowed out, my bones filled with a dull, buzzing exhaustion. The noise of the dining hall felt louder, the smell sharper, the needs of the people in line more vast and overwhelming than usual. I just had to get through the shift. That's what I kept telling myself. Just get through it. The soup was a thick lentil, heavy and steaming. It was my job to ladle it from the massive stockpot on the stove into the serving tureen in the dining hall. The pot was too big, too heavy. I was supposed to ask for help, but the other kitchen assistant had called in sick, and asking for help felt like admitting another failure in a day already full of them. I wrapped my hands in threadbare dish towels, gripped the handles, and heaved. The pot was a dead weight, a liquid anchor pulling me down. My arms shook with the strain. I took a breath, then another step. My worn sneakers slipped on a patch of spilled water I hadn't seen. For a split second, I was suspended in a state of pure panic, my body knowing it was going to fail before my mind could catch up. The world tilted. The pot tipped. A wave of scalding brown soup cascaded over the side, splashing across the floor in a sickening, wasteful tide. The sound was a loud, wet slap that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the kitchen. Heat bloomed against my shins where a few drops had hit me, but the burn was nothing compared to the hot flush of shame that climbed my neck. I stood there, frozen, staring at the mess. It wasn't just soup on the floor. It was my own incompetence, my weakness, my poverty, all of it spilled out for everyone to see. My eyes burned, and the sterile kitchen air felt too thin to breathe. Then, a quiet presence at my side. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Arthur. He didn't say anything at first. He just moved into my line of sight, his expression calm, unreadable. He looked at the mess on the floor, then at the heavy pot still trembling in my grip, and then, finally, at my face. His gaze wasn't pitying. It was steady. It was assessing. It felt, strangely, like a shield. He reached out, his large, clean hands closing over mine on one of the handles. His touch was firm, grounding. "Let me carry this," he said, his voice a low, calm murmur that cut through the buzzing in my ears. He effortlessly took the weight of the pot, his strength making a mockery of my struggle. He set it carefully back on the stove. I just stood there, my arms hanging uselessly at my sides, my hands tingling where he had touched them. I swayed on my feet, the adrenaline leaving me as quickly as it had come. The room felt swimmy, the fluorescent lights too bright. I must have stumbled, because in the next instant his hand was on my arm, warm and solid, steadying me. He was close now, close enough that I could smell the clean, faint scent of soap and something else, something like cedar and cold air. He looked down at me, his eyes, a deep, clear gray, holding a flicker of concern. My breath hitched. I felt utterly exposed, like a child who had made a mess he couldn't possibly clean up. He saw it. I know he saw it. The exhaustion, the despair, the thin wire I was walking. And then he spoke again, his voice even quieter this time, meant only for me. He took the soup-splattered ladle from my nerveless fingers and set it on the counter. His gaze met mine, direct and unwavering. "Let me carry you, too," he said. The words didn't make sense, not literally, but they landed in the hollow space inside my chest with a soft, profound weight. It wasn't an order or an offer of charity. It was a statement, a quiet promise. He saw the burden I was carrying, the one that had nothing to do with a pot of soup, and he was offering to share the load. In that moment, surrounded by the smell of spilled lentils and bleach, something inside me that had been clenched tight for months began to tentatively, cautiously, let go. After the soup incident, the texture of my shifts changed. Or maybe it was just the texture of my attention. I started watching Arthur, not with the distant curiosity of before, but with a new, focused intensity. I was looking for clues, trying to understand the man who had spoken those impossible words. He gave nothing away easily. He returned to his quiet routines, his calm competence a steadying rhythm in the shelter's frantic pulse. He still fixed things. He still spoke to the guests with a respect that felt less like kindness and more like a deeply held principle. He never mentioned the spilled soup again. He had a way of being present that was unlike anyone I had ever known. When he was sanding the edge of a splintered doorframe, his entire focus was on the wood, the rasp of the paper, the fine dust rising in the afternoon light. When he listened to one of the older residents, a woman named Mary who told the same story about her lost cat every single day, his attention was absolute. He would nod, his gray eyes soft, as if he were hearing the story for the very first time. He didn't offer solutions or empty platitudes. He just offered the weight of his presence. We started to exist in a shared space. Before, I had made myself small in the kitchen, trying to be unobtrusive. Now, I found myself working alongside him more often. We'd stand side by side at the long stainless steel counter, the rhythmic thump of my knife chopping onions a counterpoint to the quiet scrape of his as he diced carrots with methodical precision. We rarely spoke, but the silence wasn't empty. It was companionable, filled with the small sounds of our shared task. It was in those silences that I began to learn the language of him. I learned the slight dip of his head was a sign of agreement. I learned that the small line that appeared between his brows meant he was concentrating, not displeased. I learned that just before he was about to say something of substance, he would pause, his gaze turning inward for a moment as if weighing each word for its truth and necessity. His economy of movement extended to his speech. He never wasted a word. One rainy Tuesday, the storm was so bad the buses stopped running. The end of my shift came and went, and I was stranded. I sat in the deserted dining hall, watching the rain lash against the windows, trying to figure out how I was going to walk the 3 miles home without getting completely soaked. My thin jacket was no match for this kind of weather. The thought of my cold, empty apartment at the end of that walk made a familiar ache settle deep in my bones. "Leo," his voice came from behind me, low and even. I turned. Arthur was standing there, holding his charcoal wool coat. He had his car keys in his other hand. "The buses aren't running," he said. It wasn't a question. "I can give you a ride." My first instinct was to say no, to refuse the help, to insist on my own miserable independence. It was a reflex, born of years of having to be self-reliant because there was no other choice. Taking help felt like taking on a debt I could never repay. "It's okay," I said, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. "I can wait it out." Or walk. He didn't argue. He just looked at me, his gaze steady. He held my eyes for a long moment, and in that silence, I felt my flimsy excuses crumble. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering a practical solution to a practical problem. It was the same way he would fix a leaky pipe. He saw a need, and he met it. To refuse would be to make it into something it wasn't. It would be an act of pride, and I was too tired, too cold, for pride. "Okay," I finally breathed out. "Thank you." A barely perceptible nod was his only reply. "Come on," he said, turning toward the door. His car was what I expected, and yet not. It wasn't a flashy sports car, but a large, dark sedan. A German make, older but immaculately kept. The inside smelled of leather and that same faint, clean scent of cedar that clung to him. The seats were soft, the cabin silent and insulated from the storm raging outside. It was like stepping into another world, a world of quiet comfort and order. As he drove, the windshield wipers swished back and forth with a soothing, hypnotic rhythm. I gave him my address, my voice tight with the embarrassment of admitting where I lived. A rundown building on the edge of town, where the landlords were neglectful and the paint was peeling. He just programmed it into the car's navigation system without comment. We drove in silence for a while, the city lights smearing across the wet windows. "You're a good worker, Leo," he said suddenly, his eyes on the road. The unexpected praise made my cheeks warm. "You're thorough. You don't cut corners, even when no one is watching." "I just mop the floors," I mumbled, staring at my hands in my lap. "It's not about the task," he replied, his voice still quiet, but firm. "It's about the character of the person doing it." He glanced at me then, a quick, sidelong look. "You have good character." I didn't know what to say to that. No one had said anything like that to me in a very long time. It felt like a gift, a small, solid thing I could hold on to. I spent the rest of the drive dissecting his words. Was he just being kind? Or did he see something in me? Something beyond the tired kid who spilled soup and couldn't afford his rent? I wondered about the man behind the wheel. What was his life like? This car, this coat. They were just the surface. What was underneath? What made a man like him spend his afternoons in the chaos and grime of a shelter kitchen? The questions piled up, unspoken, in the warm, quiet space between us. We pulled up in front of my building. The entryway light was flickering, casting long, dancing shadows. It looked even more depressing in the rain. I felt a fresh wave of shame. This was my life, laid bare for him to see. "Thank you again for the ride," I said, my hand on the door handle, eager to escape. "Wait," he said. His hand brushed my arm. A fleeting touch, just fingers against the thin fabric of my sleeve. It wasn't a restraining gesture, just enough to make me pause. My skin tingled where he'd touched me. I looked at him. His face was illuminated by the dim dashboard lights, all shadows and planes. "The forecast says rain all week," he said, his voice practical. "I'm here Tuesdays and Thursdays. I can take you home both days, if you'd like." "It's no trouble." My heart did a strange, stuttering thing in my chest. This was more than a one-time kindness. This was an offer, a routine, an insertion of himself into my life, small and practical as it was. I analyzed the offer from every angle, searching for the catch, for the hook of obligation. But his expression was open, his tone matter of fact. He was just fixing a problem, my lack of transportation. And maybe, just maybe, he wanted an excuse to spend a few more minutes with me. The thought was a dangerous spark. I stamped it out quickly. It was foolish to imagine something more. He was a wealthy, older man being kind to a struggling young employee. That was all. To think otherwise was to invite a world of hurt. "You don't have to do that," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I know," he replied. The simple words held a universe of meaning. "I know I don't have to. I want to." He let the silence stretch, giving me the space to make my own choice. The power was mine. He had handed it to me. I looked out the window at the rain, at the flickering light, at the bleakness of my reality. Then I looked back at him, at the quiet steadiness in his eyes. For the first time in a long time, someone was offering a hand without asking for anything in return. "Okay," I said, the word tasting of hope and fear in equal measure. "Thank you, Arthur." He gave that small, affirming nod again. I'll see you Tuesday, Leo. As I got out of the car and ran through the rain to my apartment, I felt the gentle weight of his gaze on my back. It wasn't a weight of pity or judgment. It felt like protection. It felt like the beginning of something I didn't yet have a name for. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to the storm, I found myself thinking not of the late rent, but of the unexpected warmth of his car, the low timbre of his voice, and the brief, electric touch of his hand on my arm. The rides home became our ritual. Every Tuesday and Thursday, after the floors were mopped and the last of the kitchen lights were turned off, I would find Arthur waiting by the door, his wool coat on, keys in hand. We fell into a comfortable pattern. He would ask about my day, and I would give simple, one-word answers at first, wary of revealing too much. But he was patient. He never pushed. He just created a space with his quiet attention, and slowly, I began to fill it. I told him small things. About the book I was reading from the library. About a funny thing one of the shelter residents had said. I found myself wanting to save up these little details of my day to share with him in the warm, quiet cocoon of his car. He was a good listener, his occasional hums of agreement or thoughtful questions making me feel heard in a way I hadn't in years. In return, he shared pieces of himself, but always in his measured way. I learned he had a daughter who lived on the other side of the country. I learned he had retired early from a career in finance, something he spoke of with a distinct lack of enthusiasm. I was good at moving numbers around, he said one evening, his eyes on the traffic ahead. But I was never building anything real. Not like this, he gestured vaguely, and I knew he meant the shelter, the tangible act of feeding people and fixing what was broken. One evening, he was working late, helping to install some new shelves he had donated to the pantry. I stayed late too, handing him tools and holding the brackets steady against the wall. We worked in our usual comfortable silence. The only sounds there were of the electric drill and the soft thud of screws finding their home in the wall studs. His hands, I noticed again, were incredibly competent. They were clean and well kept, but they knew how to work. There was no hesitation in his movements. When we were finished, he stood back to admire our work, a small, satisfied smile touching his lips. He turned to me. "Good work, team," he said, and the simple word, team, sent a ridiculous jolt of pleasure through me. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie. But his hand didn't leave right away. It rested there for a few seconds longer than necessary, its warmth seeping through my thin t-shirt. The weight of it was grounding. I could feel the strength in his grip, the slight texture of his skin. I held my breath, acutely aware of his proximity, the scent of cedar and sawdust, the faint sound of his breathing. The space between us felt charged, humming with unspoken things. I wanted to lean into his touch. I wanted to turn my head and see what was in his eyes. But I was frozen, caught between hope and a deep, instinctual fear of misreading everything. Then, as if sensing my turmoil, he squeezed my shoulder gently once and removed his hand. The moment was over. The air returned to normal. "Let's get you home," he said, his voice perfectly even, betraying nothing. But I knew something had shifted. I spent the next few days replaying that moment in my head, analyzing it until it was worn smooth. A hand on the shoulder. It meant nothing. It was a common, friendly gesture. But the way he had done it, the slight hesitation before he pulled away, the warmth that lingered long after he was gone, it felt like a question. I became a scholar of his micro-expressions. I saw the way his eyes would soften when he looked at me and thought I wasn't paying attention. I saw the faint tension in his jaw when another volunteer, a loud and overbearing man named Gary, would order me around. Arthur never intervened directly, but I could feel his protective energy, a quiet bulwark at my back. The power imbalance between us was a constant hum in the back of my mind. He was wealthy, established, secure. I was not. I was living day to day, my future a terrifying blank. I worried that my growing feelings for him were tangled up in gratitude, in a pathetic desire for rescue. I had to be sure, for my own sake, that what I felt was real, separate from the car rides and the quiet acts of care. I had to know it was about him, the man, not what he could provide. So I started to pull back, just a little. I made excuses to not work directly beside him. I kept my answers to his questions short and polite. I tried to build a wall around my heart, to protect myself from the fall I was sure was coming. He noticed. Of course, he noticed. He didn't say anything, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. The easy companionship we had built began to feel strained. The silences in the car, once comfortable, were now filled with a low-grade tension. He stopped asking as many questions, retreating into his own quiet watchfulness. The breakthrough came on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the shelving incident. It was the shelter's annual fundraising dinner. Not the nightly meal for the residents, but a formal event for donors. I had been asked to work it, helping in the kitchen and clearing plates, for extra pay that I desperately needed. Arthur was there, not as a volunteer, but as a guest, a major donor. Seeing him in a perfectly tailored dark suit was a shock. It was like seeing a familiar landmark suddenly rendered in sharp, intimidating detail. He looked powerful. He moved through the crowd with an understated confidence, shaking hands, accepting praise with a polite, reserved smile. He was in his world now, and I was just the hired help, an invisible boy in a borrowed white shirt. The chasm between our lives had never felt so vast. I tried to avoid him, keeping my eyes down as I moved between the kitchen and the dining room. But eventually, our paths crossed. I was clearing a table near where he was standing with a group of other wealthy-looking people. As I reached for a plate, my hand shook slightly, and a fork clattered to the floor. Before I could even bend to pick it up, Arthur was there. He bent down smoothly, picked up the fork, and placed it on my tray. He did it so quickly, so discreetly, that no one else in his group even noticed. He looked at me, and his eyes were not the eyes of a donor looking at a server. They were his eyes, the same steady, gray eyes that had looked at me over a puddle of spilled soup. "Leo," he said, his voice low. "Are you all right?" I just nodded, unable to speak. I felt a hot flush of shame, the same kind I'd felt in the kitchen weeks ago. I was out of my depth, a fraud in this glittering room. He seemed to understand. He placed a hand on my arm, right over my racing pulse. "Breathe," he murmured. "You belong here as much as anyone." He glanced back at the group he had been talking to, then looked back at me. "My car is out front. When your shift is over, just come out. I'll wait." It wasn't a question this time. It was a command, but a gentle one. An anchor in a swirling sea of insecurity. I nodded again, and he gave my arm a final, reassuring squeeze before turning back to his conversation, as if nothing had happened. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the borrowed tablecloths were folded, I walked out into the cool night air. His car was there, a dark, solid shape parked under a street lamp. He was in the driver's seat, the interior light off. He had been waiting. For how long, I didn't know. I got in, the silence of the car a welcome relief after the noise of the party. He didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there, looking at me. "That was difficult for you," he said softly. "It's fine," I lied. "No, it wasn't," he said, his voice gentle but firm, cutting through my pretense. "I saw you. You looked like you wanted to disappear." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with a vulnerability I had never heard before. "Is it me, Leo? Am I the reason? Seeing me like that, does it make things uncomfortable?" The question was an open door. He was asking about the money, the status, the suit. He was naming the elephant that had been sitting between us for weeks. He was giving me permission to be honest, and I was so tired of hiding. "Yes," I whispered, the admission tearing from my throat. "It does. Because I look at you, and then I look at me, and I don't see how it could ever work." I couldn't even name what it was. Arthur was silent for a long moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel. I could see the tension in them. "The things you saw tonight," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "The suit, the money, that's the shell. It's not the man. The man is the one who fixes shelves and peels potatoes next to you. Can you see him?" "I see him," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That's the problem. I see him, and I trailed off, unable to say the words. He turned in his seat to face me fully. He reached out, not to touch me, but just held his hand in the space between us, palm up. An invitation. "Tell me what the problem is," he said softly. "Please." I looked at his hand, then at his face. The guarded calm was gone. In its place was a raw, hopeful wanting that mirrored my own. And I knew I couldn't pull back anymore. I had to step forward, or step away for good. I took a shaky breath. "The problem, Arthur," I said, my voice trembling, "is that I think I'm falling for you. And it terrifies me." The confession hung in the silent car, fragile and immense. Arthur didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched me, his gray eyes searching my face, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I had made a horrible mistake. I had misread everything. The kindness, the attention, the lingering touches. Maybe they were just that, the actions of a compassionate man who felt sorry for me. The silence stretched, each second a small lifetime of regret. I felt my stomach plummet, the familiar cold dread of rejection seeping into my bones. I wanted to snatch the words back, to open the car door and run. Then, slowly, he closed his eyes, just for a beat. He took a deep, measured breath, as if steeling himself. When he opened them again, the raw wanting was still there, but it was joined by something else. Relief. A profound, soul-deep relief that softened the lines around his eyes and eased the tension in his shoulders. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "Thank you," I asked, bewildered. I just made everything incredibly awkward." "No," he said, and now a small, sad smile touched his lips. "Leo, you just saved me from myself. I've been driving myself mad, trying to figure out how to tell you the same thing without frightening you, without making you feel pressured." He shook his head, a gesture of self-deprecation. "All my resources, all my so-called power, and I was terrified of saying the wrong thing to you. I was afraid of being seen as some kind of predator, using my position to take advantage." His honesty was a gut punch, knocking the last of the fear out of me. He had been just as scared as I was. He had been navigating the same minefield of doubt and insecurity, just from the other side. The chasm between us, which had seemed so vast and uncrossable, suddenly felt much smaller. It was just a space between two people, filled with the same universal anxieties. "You thought I saw you as a predator?" I asked, my voice incredulous. "Arthur, I've only ever seen you as kind and steady and safe." "Safe is good," he said, his smile growing a little wider. "I'll take safe." He finally moved, his hand closing the small distance between us. He didn't grab my hand, but gently laid his over mine where it rested on my knee. His touch was warm, solid, and utterly deliberate. There was no ambiguity in it now. This was not a friendly gesture. This was a claim, a question, a promise. "Leo," he said, his thumb stroking softly over my knuckles, "what I feel for you has nothing to do with gratitude or pity. And I need you to believe that what you feel for me isn't about this car or my house or anything else I can buy. It has to be about us. Just us." I looked down at our hands. His, large and capable, covering mine, which were calloused from work but trembling slightly. It felt right. It felt like a circuit being completed. I turned my hand over and laced my fingers with his. His grip tightened, a silent affirmation. "It is," I said, my voice finally steady. "It's about the man who draws sparrows on scrap paper. The one who listens to Mary's stories. The one who told me I have good character when I felt like I had nothing." A visible wave of emotion passed over his face. He brought our joined hands up and pressed my knuckles to his lips for a brief, reverent moment. The touch of his mouth against my skin was soft, warm, and sent a shockwave straight to my heart. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time," he murmured against my hand. He let go and leaned toward me, his movements slow, giving me every opportunity to pull away. He cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His eyes held mine, asking the final, most important question without words. "Is this okay?" "I am okay. I am more than okay. I am here." I give a small, almost imperceptible nod, and it's all the answer he needs. I close my eyes. I feel the soft gravity of his presence as he leans in. The kiss was not what I expected. There was no desperate passion, no frantic claiming. It was soft. It was unbelievably tender. It was a question and an answer all in one. His lips were gentle against mine, a quiet exploration, a confirmation of everything that had passed between us in silence for weeks. It was a kiss that felt like coming home after a long, hard journey. It tasted of relief. He pulled back slightly, just enough to rest his forehead against mine. We stayed like that for a long time, breathing the same air, our eyes closed. I could feel the steady beat of his heart, or maybe it was my own. In the quiet darkness of the car, with the faint hum of the city outside, the world narrowed to this single point of contact. His hand was still on my cheek, his thumb making slow, soothing circles. "So," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through me, "where do we go from here?" The practical question grounded me. He wasn't getting lost in the romance of the moment. He was already thinking about the reality, about how to build something real and lasting, how to do it right. I opened my eyes and looked at him. Slowly, I suggested, the word coming out as a hopeful question. A genuine, beautiful smile lit up his face, reaching his eyes and making them shine. I can do slowly, he said. Slowly is my specialty. He leaned in and gave me one more soft, brief kiss. How about we start with a proper date? No uniforms, no donors, no soup. Just you and me. I'd like that, I said, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, the future didn't feel like a terrifying blank. It felt like an open door, and standing in the doorway was a kind, steady man, offering to walk through it with me. The morning after felt unreal. I woke up in my own lumpy bed, the gray dawn light filtering through the thin curtains, and for a moment, I was convinced I had dreamed the entire thing. The fundraiser, the conversation in the car, the kiss. It all felt too good, too cinematic to have happened in my small, gritty life. But then I touched my lips, and I could still feel the phantom pressure of his, the memory of that impossible tenderness. It was real. A familiar anxiety began to creep in, a cold little snake coiling in my stomach. What now? We had confessed our feelings, but the fundamental facts of our lives hadn't changed. He was still Arthur, the wealthy benefactor. I was still Leo, the guy who was a week away from being evicted. The kiss had felt like a moment between equals, but outside the bubble of his car, were we? The thought made me want to retreat, to pull the covers over my head and hide from the complications. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it with a sense of dread, expecting a text that was awkward, or worse, regretful. But it was from him. Good morning, Leo. I hope you slept well. I'm not going to pretend I'm not thinking about last night. But I also want to give you space. No pressure. We can talk whenever you're ready. I read the message 3 times. The words were so, Arthur, calm, considered, respectful. I want to give you space. He was already anticipating my anxiety, my need to process. He wasn't pushing, wasn't demanding. He was quietly reassuring me that I was still in control. The little snake of anxiety in my stomach uncoiled slightly. I typed back a reply, my fingers clumsy. Good morning. I slept better than I have in a long time. I'm thinking about it too. His reply was almost instantaneous. A simple smiley face. It was so unexpectedly normal, so out of character for the stoic man I knew, that it made me laugh. A real, honest laugh. At our next shift, I was a bundle of nerves. How would we act? Would it be awkward? Would people notice? When I walked into the kitchen, he was already there, wiping down the steel counters. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes met mine across the room. A slow, quiet smile spread across his face, a private, intimate thing meant only for me. In that single look, he communicated everything. I see you. I'm happy you're here. We're okay. He walked over, ostensibly to get a new cleaning cloth from the cupboard next to me. As he passed, his hand brushed against the small of my back, a fleeting, proprietary touch that sent a jolt of warmth through me. It was a secret kept in plain sight. I found a place I think you might like, he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear as he reached into the cupboard. For our date. It's quiet. Okay. I breathed, my heart thumping. Is Saturday good for you? I nodded. Saturday is good. I'll pick you up at 7, he said. And then he was gone, back to his counter, as if we'd just been discussing the daily soup special. The brief exchange left me feeling breathless and giddy. The test came sooner than I expected. Gary, the overbearing volunteer, saw me struggling to lift a heavy crate of potatoes. Hey, kid, use your legs, he barked, not unkindly, but with his usual gruff condescension. Before I could reply, Arthur was there. He didn't say a word to Gary. He simply walked over to me, put his hands on the crate next to mine, and said, Let's lift it together. We hoisted it easily onto the counter. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. Are you okay? I gave him a small, grateful nod. Then he turned to Gary. His name is Leo, he said, his voice calm and even, but with an unmistakable edge of steel. Not kid, Gary blinked, taken aback. He looked from Arthur's stony face to mine and back again. A slow, dawning comprehension spread across his features. He mumbled an apology and made himself scarce. The entire kitchen had gone quiet, watching the exchange. I could feel their eyes on us, the speculation buzzing in the air. My cheeks burned. Later, during a lull, Arthur found me in the dry pantry, stacking cans. I'm sorry if I overstepped back there, he said quietly. I shouldn't have interfered. No, I said, turning to face him. Thank you. He's been calling me that for months. It won't happen again, Arthur said. It was a simple statement of fact. He looked at me, his expression serious. This is going to be difficult, Leo. People will talk. They'll make assumptions. Are you prepared for that? Are you? I countered. They'll say worse things about you. I'm 52 years old, he said with a wry smile. I stopped caring what people say a long time ago. My only concern is you. I don't want us to make your life harder. It's not, I said, and the truth of it surprised me. It's making it better. Having you in my corner. It makes me feel stronger. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers gentle against my temple. Good, he said softly, because I plan on staying there. He also found a way to address the money issue, the one that still made me feel off balance. During our ride home that night, he cleared his throat, a sound I was coming to recognize as the prelude to a difficult conversation. I want to be transparent with you, Leo, he began. My financial situation is significant, and I know that creates an imbalance. I've been thinking about how to navigate that in a way that respects your independence, he paused. I have a small foundation that manages my charitable giving. It needs a part-time administrator, someone to handle correspondence, track donations, organize files. The work is simple, but it requires precision and integrity. It pays well. I thought of you. I opened my mouth to protest, to say I couldn't accept, but he held up a hand. Hear me out. This isn't a gift. It's a real job. You'd be interviewed by the foundation's director, a woman who has no idea who you are. You'd report to her, not to me. Your salary would come from the foundation's operating budget. It would be entirely separate from me. It would give you financial stability, and it would get you out of the shelter kitchen, unless you truly want to stay. He looked at me, his gaze earnest. It's an opportunity. You can take it or leave it, and my feelings for you will not change one bit. Your choice. He had thought it all through. He had created a structure, a set of boundaries to protect me, to preserve my agency. He wasn't trying to rescue me. He was offering me a tool so I could rescue myself. It was the most respectful, most considerate thing anyone had ever done for me. Tears pricked my eyes. Why are you so good to me? I whispered. He reached over and took my hand, his thumb stroking my palm. Because watching you struggle is harder than anything else I've ever had to do, he said simply. And because I'm falling in love with you, Leo. And I want to build a life with you. A real one. On even ground, his words, spoken so plainly, so calmly, settled deep inside me. A quiet foundation settling into place. Falling in love with you. He loved me. And in that moment, sitting in the warm, safe darkness of his car, I knew with absolute certainty that I loved him too. Not for his money, not for his protection, but for the man he was. The man who saw me. The man who offered me not a handout, but a hand up. I'll apply for the job, I said, my voice clear and strong. And Arthur, I'm falling in love with you, too. The smile he gave me then was like the sun coming out after a long, cold rain. It was everything. We went on our date that Saturday. He took me to a small, quiet Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street, with checkered tablecloths and candles flickering in wine bottles. It was perfect. We talked for hours, really talked, filling in the spaces that our silent companionship at the shelter had left empty. I told him about my failed attempt at starting a graphic design business, the debt it had left me in, and the family disappointment that had sent me spiraling. He listened without judgment, his steady gaze making me feel safe enough to be vulnerable. He told me about his life, about a marriage that had been more of a business partnership than a love affair, ending amicably years ago, about his daughter, a marine biologist he was immensely proud of, and he told me why he started volunteering. After he sold his company, he'd felt adrift, his days empty and meaningless. I had everything, he said, swirling the wine in his glass, and I felt nothing. The shelter, it grounded me. It reminded me what was real. We agreed to take things slow, to build our foundation brick by brick. We understood that our circumstances were different, and that navigating the world as a couple would come with challenges. But we agreed to face them together, with honesty and communication as our guiding principles. He was adamant about boundaries. He would not try to solve my financial problems, but he would support me as I solved them myself. The job with the foundation was the perfect example of that principle in action. I applied, interviewed with the director, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor, and based on my own merits, I got the job. The first paycheck from that job was one of the proudest moments of my life. I paid my rent on time. I bought groceries, not from the Denidkin aisle, but fresh vegetables and good coffee. And I took Arthur out for dinner. I insisted on paying. He tried to argue, but I stood my ground. When I slid my new debit card across the table, the feeling of empowerment was heady. He just smiled, a look of immense pride in his eyes. He understood what that moment meant to me. Our relationship unfolded in a series of quiet, domestic moments that felt more intimate than any grand gesture could. I started spending weekends at his house, a beautiful old stone building with large windows that looked out over a sprawling garden. It wasn't a palace, it was a home. It was filled with books and art and comfortable, well-worn furniture. It felt like him, solid, tasteful, and welcoming. One Sunday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I padded into his kitchen, a vast, sun-drenched room with a huge wooden island in the center. He was standing at the stove, wearing a simple gray t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair slightly rumpled from sleep. He was making pancakes. He looked up when I came in and smiled that slow, warm smile that always made my heart ache in the best possible way. "Morning," he said, his voice husky with sleep. "Coffee's ready." I walked over and wrapped my arms around him from behind, resting my cheek against his strong, warm back. He leaned into my embrace, placing one of his hands over mine on his stomach. We stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together, the only sound the gentle sizzle of the pancakes on the griddle. It was so simple, so normal, and it felt like the most profound kind of arrival. This wasn't a fantasy or a dream. This was my life now. This quiet intimacy, this easy comfort, this feeling of being completely and utterly at home. He turned in my arms to face me, his hands coming up to cup my face. "I love this," he murmured, his eyes soft. "Waking up with you, me too," I said, my voice thick. I love you, Leo," he said, and he kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of coffee and maple syrup and the promise of 1,000 more mornings just like this one. A few months later, we were sitting on his back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and purple. I had officially moved in the week before. My old apartment was a distant memory, a symbol of a life that no longer felt like mine. I had a job I was good at, one that gave me purpose and security. I had a partner who loved and respected me. The constant, gnawing anxiety that had been my companion for so long had been replaced by a quiet, steady sense of peace. I leaned my head on his shoulder, his arm wrapping securely around me. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the day end. I thought back to the man I was when I first met him, the broken, scared kid drowning in shame in the shelter kitchen. It felt like a lifetime ago. He hadn't rescued me, not really. He had simply held up a light, shown me a path, and given me the strength to walk it myself. He had given me the space to become the man I was always meant to be. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, his lips brushing against my hair. "The soup," I said, a small smile on my face. "I was thinking about the day I spilled the soup," he chuckled, a low, warm sound. "I think about that day too. I saw you standing there, so exhausted you could barely stand, but still trying to carry that impossible weight all by yourself. And I wanted to take it from you." "You did," I said, turning my head to look at him. "You took the pot, and then you took the rest of it, piece by piece. We carried it together," he corrected gently. "That's what partners do," he was right. Our partnership wasn't about his wealth or my youth. Those were just facts, like the color of our eyes or our height. They were the context, not the story. The story was about two people who found each other in a noisy kitchen and built a quiet life. It was about mutual respect. It was about seeing the character of a person, not their circumstances. It was about the steady, unassuming power of care. The last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky. The cool night air settled around us, but I felt nothing but warmth. I was no longer isolated, no longer afraid. I was home, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that this was just the beginning. We had a whole lifetime of sunrises and sunsets to share, a quiet foundation strong enough to build anything upon. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.